Welcome to the lesson on death, meaning, manner, mechanism, cause, and time. We're introing with the Lion King's The Circle of Life as a reminder that death is part of life. These are some of the objectives for our unit. So we'll start out by looking at what death actually is. And I realize this definition seems somewhat lacking, the cessation or end of life, but it is actually a difficult thing to define. And this word irreversible tends to be a helpful word in defining death because there can be a cessation of blood circulation without resulting in death. So irreversible cessation of blood circulation, cessation of all brain activity, encapsulates most of that, although there is some extenuating discrepancy there. Basically, an organism dies on the cellular level, one cell by one cell by one cell, until collectively the organism itself cannot continue to exist. And the process of autolysis, or literally death to self, as we break down that word, is cell breakdown. And a basic idea of how the mechanism works is that there are waste products that are leaving the cell by way of the lysosome, and they're digested in there by the lysosome and then released outside of the cell. Well, when the normal metabolism of the cell can no longer occur due to various causes of death, then these waste products build up in the cell, and that causes the autolysis of the cell. When we look at death investigation, the manner of death is one of the first things that is sought to be determined. And this is the big picture, the manner in which the death occurred. There are 5 different categories that a medical examiner or a coroner would deem as the manner of death in a case that they evaluate. The first is natural, and that is the most common. The second is accidental. This could be something like a person changing a tire, the jack fails, the car comes down on them. This is an example of accidental death. Suicidal, homicidal, and then undetermined. And those would obviously be ones that cannot be determined to go into any of the other 4 categories. Now, once you've established the manner of death, the cause of death is a little bit more specific. So, for example, cause of death could be heart failure. Cause of death could be car accident. Cause of death could be the result of a firearm. Mechanism of death is where we really hit the physiology, the science of what's happening in the body. This is the specific change in the body brought about in this process. So, for example, manner of death, homicidal. Cause of death, gunshot wound. Mechanism of death, hemorrhaging or internal bleeding. Now, the time of death is something that we'll also concentrate on and can be very important in investigation. The first thing that can clue you into the time of death is livor mortis. Lividity is a result of decomposition of blood and also a result of gravity. So this is something that's used a lot in crime scene investigation shows, and the idea is that gravity will pull blood at its lowest point. And so if you see a body like this, for example, that has lividity on the back, but is turned on its side and found at the scene, then what you would know is that it had been moved. And that's because gravity would have pulled it to its lowest point. So this would have been the lowest point around that time of death. And that's called livor mortis. Now, in terms of the time frame, lividity will begin about 2 hours after death, and the permanency of that discoloration will set in after about 8 hours. And you're going to see that a lot of things that we give a time frame for are going to depend on other factors, such as temperature. Another thing that can help an investigator to evaluate the time since death is what we call rigor mortis, or a rigidity that happens upon death. So the way that your muscles contract is through myosin and actin fibers, and there are several things that are needed for those contractions and subsequent releases to happen. Without oxygen in the blood, there is an imbalance in the ions that have to be kept at the correct balance for your muscles to contract and then for those fibers to release. So what happens is that those muscles have the ATP, or the energy, to contract, but are not allowed to release immediately. And so you have a stiffening starting with the head and then expanding throughout the body. Now, after about 15 hours, the muscle fibers will literally begin to undergo disintegration, and that's when we don't see rigor mortis anymore. So rigor mortis can be used most helpfully in an investigation within those 15 hours. So this is a picture of what I was describing with the myosin and actin filaments, which are going to contract here and then release. And so live muscle fibers will slide back and forth, but after death they become locked in that flexed position until the muscles give way. This is an interesting time frame. You see that just over 2 hours after death, the body is most rigid. And in less than 2 hours or more than 48 hours, you really see no rigor. And then after 36 hours, stiffness generally disappears. So another trend is that the smaller muscles, such as that in the hand and the face, tend to contract first, and then rigor mortis will spread into the larger muscles of the body as well. So we mentioned that there are some important variables that can affect the timing of things that happen to the body after death. The first is ambient temperature, the temperature at which the body is exposed to. Also the weight. So a person who is a lot larger versus a little bit smaller will have different type of rigor mortis set in. Type of clothing, the health of the person, level of physical activity, and sun exposure. Generally, things that cause the body to be at a higher temperature would cause rigor mortis to set in faster and then finish faster. The third helpful type of mortis in being able to determine time since death is algor mortis. This is the chill of death, and that is that you maintain a stable internal body temperature of about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's going to gradually fall until it meets that of the ambient temperature surrounding the body. It just takes a certain amount of time to do that, and that amount of time is a pretty predictable rate if we know the ambient temperature. So generally the body loses about 1.5 degrees per hour, and this is in kind of moderate temperatures. And then that rate of loss will slow to about 1 degree per hour after the first 12 hours. So the coroner typically does not do this on the crime scene, but one thing that a medical examiner may do on the scene is actually to insert the thermometer into the liver to be able to measure that temperature consistently. And then obviously this is an estimate, so time of death using algor mortis would be expressed as a range. Alright, so another way of learning more about the body post-mortem, or after death, is through stomach and intestinal contents. And based on the timing of digestion, we can kind of get an estimate of potential time since death. So if undigested food is in the stomach, that tells us that it was between 0 and 2 hours that the victim had their last meal. If the stomach is empty but there's food in the small intestine, then death occurred at least 4 to 6 hours after a meal. And if the small intestine is empty and waste is in the large intestine, death occurred 12 or more hours after a meal. And of course, this is the general progression of digestion. And so the further that bolus of food has moved from stomach to small intestine to large intestine, then the longer ago than that was. Okay, let's play a game. I'd like for you to jot down numbers on your paper, 1 through 9. And I'd like for you to choose which option, A, B, or C, you think meets the time criteria for each of these things to happen during decomposition after death. So go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, so let's see how you did. Fluids leaking from body openings as cell membranes rupture. This is within 6 to 10 days. Discoloration of the face is actually the shortest time frame listed here, within 2 days. Skin sloughing off, longest time frame here, 6 to 10 days. Blistering of the skin happens after 4 days. Green and purplish staining from blood decomposition happens within 2 days. That's a fairly rapid process. You know, the bacteria that once assisted you in your digestion of foods that you ate is now going to begin breaking your own cells down as you're no longer giving it nutrients to eat. So literally bacteria will break us down from the inside out as well as the outside in. Bloating of the corpse within 6 to 10 days. Eyeballs and other tissues liquefying, 6 to 10 days. Swelling of the abdomen after 4 days. And marbling appearance on the skin happens within 2 days. One other component that we'll cover in a lot more detail in the future is what insects can tell us on or around the body post-mortem. So basically, a forensic entomologist specializes in studying insects and understanding the timing of different points of development or stages of development with those different insects. And knowledge of the environmental conditions in that time is really important in being able to time those ranges of insect maturation. So it's amazing. Within 10 minutes of death, a blowfly can actually smell that death in the air. There are chemical components that are released that the fly can detect, and within 10 minutes outdoors, a person may have fly eggs laid in the orifices of the body. So, less than 8 hours after death, the blowfly eggs can be found in those moist, warm areas of the corpse. And then you see within 20 hours, the first of the 3 larval stages will occur. So here are the eggs of the fly, followed by the first larval stage. And then in the 4th or 5th day, the 3rd larval stage will occur. And then you can kind of think of this like a caterpillar cocoon. The larval stage, which has been moving around, eating tissue, will now be dormant in this pupa until it hatches as an adult fly. So again, 8 to 12 days, the larva will migrate to a dry place. And then in 18 to 24 days, you have the early pupa, which is immobile. And then by the 21st to 24th day, the pupa will split and that adult blowfly will emerge. Once again, this is definitely an estimation rather than an exact time of death. Alright, and so I will invite you to take a look at the summary of what we've covered today. And feel free to pause the video if you like. I appreciate your time.